Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin here with the Illinois Channel, and I'm joined with Jeff Berkowitz from Public Affairs TV. Jeff, it's been a while. You've been doing interviews on some of the people in Chicago running for the school board. We're not going to talk about that today, but I tell them to the audience that's why we haven't been coming back. Both Jeff and I have been doing our own brand of reporting in our separate entities. But Jeff, obviously the big news that is changing not only the United States but the world is that Donald Trump is now not only have been the 45th president, he is now the 47th president of the United States. Everyone knows that. But I want to say something right off the top here. Because Trump has this gap in between, Biden in between his two terms of office, what's interesting, and someone else made this comment the other day that I was thinking about, that if Trump had been reelected, when you get a second term in a normal way, following your first 4 years, you get a second 4 years, everyone is a little bit worn out. You get a changeover of staff. The president doesn't have the enthusiasm that he had because he's already been in office for 4 years. And now Trump coming back in is different than when we reelected Reagan or reelected Clinton. Trump is coming in with a whole lot of enthusiasm, not only for himself, but his supporters, because in the supporters' minds, they've suffered through 4 years of Biden, and they are geared up to take on the challenges and do all sorts of things that we will be talking about. Before we get into our discussion of some of the personalities and policies, let me just refresh the audience. If you haven't seen, folks, Trump has now amassed 312 electoral college votes, 74, almost 75 million votes. He got the majority of the vote, 50.3%. And when we look at an electoral map here, and this was taken before Arizona and Nevada were called for sure, but they did go for Trump. You can see it was a red wave across most of the United States, while the West Coast and East Coast remain in Democratic hands. And of course here in Illinois, we see that it went to the Democrat Kamala Harris. However, when we look at Illinois in a deeper vein, you can see how many counties of the 102 counties across the state Trump carried. On the other hand, those counties in the Chicagoland area and collar counties, and there we see both in the Peoria area and Champaign, Urbana, as well as the counties down in the Metro East. Those more populated counties did go to the Democrats, and that's why the Democrats are in full control here in Illinois. But Jeff, we're going to be having a whole lot of fun things to be talking about, not only between here and the inauguration with the people who are joining the candidates, joining the Trump administration, but also when we get into it, all the different changes that'll be coming up.
Can we jump into the fun, Terry? Because the big news as we take this on November 15th is, can Trump get through what he views as his key nominees for his cabinet? His two most important departments to get a control of the U.S. government, the Department of Justice. He has been, for 4 years, basically off and on, he's been prosecuted by, he thinks, the Department of Justice of the United States. So he really wants to get a handle on that. He wants to revitalize that. The DOJ, that's his target. And the man for him, he thinks, to do it is Matt Gaetz, the Attorney General nominee. So that's number one on his mind. Number two.
And Jeff, hang on just 1 second, if I might. Let me just bring up, for the people who don't know, Matt Gaetz is a Republican congressman from Florida. And the other thing that we have to note, because this is critical, and why Matt Gaetz may not end up being the Attorney General that Trump wants, because Matt Gaetz was the House member that challenged after Mr. McCarthy, Speaker McCarthy was the Speaker. He was the one that challenged the Speaker. Back then you could remove the Speaker if even one member of the House challenged you, and Gaetz did, and it led up to McCarthy being voted out of the Speaker's chair. So a lot of Republicans are still very irritated with Mr. Gates, and in the Senate as well, where they have to confirm. There's some question about whether he will be approved as the Attorney General.
Right. He is going to be the hardest nominee for Trump to get through. And look, Matt Gaetz just has enormous number of enemies. You mentioned one of the main reasons of, in many Republicans' minds, he screwed up the Republican Party in needless fights about who would be Speaker. But he's got a lot of enemies all over the place, especially in the House and Senate. And you don't want to have a lot of enemies in the Senate because they are the folks. Trump gets to nominate people, but it's the advice and consent of the Senate constitutionally. And the U.S. Senate loves their clubby atmosphere, and they believe in advice and consent, and they want to make sure. And both parties think this, Republicans and Democrats. They guard that power jealously. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, Trump is also upset about, still remembers the spying that occurred. He says occurred, and I think there's a lot of evidence, as he was coming into the presidency 8 years ago, and he holds responsible the FBI and the CIA and a variety of intelligence agencies. So he wants to shake up the intel agencies, and so his number two target is Director of National Intelligence. His nominee there is Tulsi Gabbard, who has her own controversy. So those two are going to be, I think, the toughest of all the nominees. We can get to the others, but and if he
the other, as long as we're speaking of possible challenges,
right. Sure.
Another one, which was, Trump has had a number of surprises. Matt Gaetz was flabbergasted me. I even put on Facebook, he is not the guy for the Attorney General's office. But normally I wouldn't do that, but I just thought pretty strongly that, he has his moments, Mr. Gaetz, but he's not the right guy for the Attorney General's office. Another surprise, and there's a number of surprises, Bobby Kennedy for HHS. I thought Bobby Kennedy would have been a White House domestic policy advisor, something along those lines, but not a cabinet secretary. But lo and behold, Robert Kennedy Jr., 70 years old. People call him a vaccine denier. That he is not that, as he has said. He has had all of his vaccines. He believes in vaccines. He was very critical of the COVID vaccines. And he has, I'm not sure, but there have been, over the years, questions about whether some of these vaccines that are out there for children, is there any link between that and autism or some of the other maladies? In most cases, there is no direct link, but there are suspicions. And in general, what Robert Kennedy wants to do is take on the pharma companies, take on the food companies. So a lot of changes here, but he's going to have his own set of enemies.
Look, at least half or almost half of the 20 or so nominees that have come out, you could say represent one major thing. That is change. Trump views this, and I think correctly so, it was a change election. It's one of the main reasons why he won certainly all 7 of the swing states, because this country was ready for change. The Democratic Party had 2 people, and especially its nominee, Harris, who did not represent change. She had been vice president for the last 5 years, ratifying and confirming and agreeing with everything that Joe Biden said. It was the Biden presidency or the Biden-Harris presidency. And so the point is, he wants to change DOJ, Trump does. He wants to change the intel agencies. He wants to change the Pentagon and defense. He wants to change HHS. Those are 4 enormous entities in the government that have enormous budgets, enormous numbers of people, and enormous impact. And he wants to change foreign policy. We didn't get to the National Security Agency and his NSA advisor. Those are the biggies. And he basically wants to poke them in the eye. He wants to poke every one of those agencies and say, you have not been doing it right. People elected me to bring about change, and I'm going to do it. And so every one of these folks are iconic. I mean, they are the antithesis of what has preceded them.
Well, let me bring up another surprise. Let's talk about surprises. This is another one. Pete Hegseth, who is a decorated combat veteran and had been a weekend host on Fox News, and so people probably know him from that. But no one, I think, saw that coming. But Hegseth has written a book, The War on Warriors, and he was fed up. He is fed up, I should say, with all of this pushing of woke policies within the Pentagon and onto our defense structure. And Hegseth is going to be targeting that, among other things. Now, we should also say, and we'll get into this a bit, some of the waste, fraud, and abuse. The Pentagon needs to be shaken up, not just for the woke policies, which are, DEI and different things being taught, even at West Point. Hegseth is targeting that. But the Pentagon is unable to pass an audit, and they have lost over the years. They have unaccounted something like $12 trillion in assets that they don't have any paperwork for. So this government, as it has been run, not merely in the Biden administration, but over the decades, really needs reforms. We'll have to see if the new Trump administration can do it. But what we are seeing right now is, as you were saying, that we are getting a number of people who are from left field. I mean, really not just where you're picking a senator or a congressman or a governor, as we typically see, but picking Bobby Kennedy, picking Matt Gaetz was a real surprise, even though he's a congressman. Picking Pete Hegseth is a huge surprise. And Trump is going for broke here. He is not just following the path that we have seen over the years.
Well, two quick things. One, foreign policy and especially Middle East policy is due for a major change. And he has put people as the ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, who certainly you're not your normal ambassador to Israel, and certainly not your normal foreign service officer or anything of that type. And he's brought in a special Mid-East envoy, a real estate investor, well-known, Stephen Witkoff. And again, these are not people with the traditional backgrounds for these positions, because he thinks they're not the people. He doesn't want a traditional background. So the question is, can he get most of these? He's certainly not going to get all of these, but can he get most of these to lead the agencies? That's important. And number one, he's really looking for, people say this about Trump. Trump looks at these people like he's casting a TV show. And he wants people who look the part, sound the part that he's going to play, that his people are going to play. And he's also looking for people who are really strong on communications. He knows they're going to face enormous pushback from the left-wing media. 90%, everybody knows this, of our national media are biased left. And he's going to face that pushback. So he wants a guy like Pete Hegseth, who is, Whoopi Goldberg said, oh, he's an anchor on Fox, and he's not even a real anchor, she said. He's just a weekend anchor, okay? Well, weekend anchor or not, Pete Hegseth knows how to communicate. And Tulsi Gabbard knows how to communicate. He
does, and I would say Matt Gaetz. If you want to give Matt Gaetz some gold stars, he is a great communicator. And when the current Attorney General, Garland, testified before the House Judiciary Committee, Matt Gaetz tore him apart with his questioning and made him look like a fool. Some people have said it was that questioning in a committee hearing not too long ago that may have put him in Trump's mind as far as putting him in as Attorney General. And one other thing on this, let me say that's critical when we look at the new Trump administration. Trump was new to Washington when he came in last time, and he made some bad appointments. And one of them was Jeff Sessions. And then because of the Russian collusion things, which Sessions then recused himself from, Trump, as President of the United States, never had his own people really running the Department of Justice. He was never satisfied with that. He had Wiseman, who was a Democrat, managing the store, while Jeff Sessions had recused himself. So I think what we're seeing here is not just in the Department of Justice, the DOJ, but in all of these departments. Trump wants people who are going to really be representing the Trump revolution. So he knows going in, we know this, when you come in the first time, you think, we'll probably be reelected. I'm going to have 8 years. Trump knows from the get-go he has 4 years and that's it. So he is going to be operating this administration as much as he can at warp speed, trying to push through his agenda, push through his people, get the policies passed. And because he has a House and Senate now of the Republican control, he's going to have a good chance to get a heck of a lot done in the first 2 years, and then we'll have to see what happens at the midterm elections.
Right. The phrase that comes to mind, we've all heard this: fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. He was fooled once by not understanding, perhaps not even knowing, how deep the deep state is, especially at DOJ. That is the deepest of the deep states. You have to go through that department and clean house. I'm not sure how he's going to do it, but you got to get your people there who believe, and you want good, smart, shrewd people. I mean, Matt Gaetz is no dummy. He's really good at communications. He's a Williams and Mary Law School grad. That's a good law school. He knows how, as you pointed out, he knows how to cross-examine people. He's done that. It's been impressive. So none of these people are dummies. Pete Hegseth, not a dummy. Okay, Tulsi Gabbard, not a dummy. Matt Gaetz, not a dummy. So I'm not saying Jeff Sessions was a dummy, but he was so ill prepared to deal with the onslaught that he was.
There are people who are good senators. They're good senators, but they're not good cabinet members. It's a different environment. When you're a senator, you're like one member of a committee that's 100 people. When you're a cabinet officer, you're the guy at the top of the pyramid, and the only guy above you is the president. So it's just a different environment. And that was the problem. And, when we look at defense, and we got Pete Hegseth is going to be totally on board with Trump and the Trump revolution. What happened last time in the Trump administration? He brought in Mad Dog, and I'm dropping his last name right, Mad Dog Mattis, and ended up firing him. Then he brought in a replacement whose name, the man escapes my memory right now, but he fired him as well then eventually. So Trump stumbled with appointments in his first administration. And I think what we're seeing here is because of that, again, brand loyalty to Trump. Obviously, you don't want to be picking people who aren't loyal to your administration, but these are people who are going to be really strong on the Trump team, and a lot of the people in the first administration were not.
Well, and this is the complete antithesis of Biden. You almost couldn't remember, you can't almost name any of the people who were in the cabinet of Biden. It was rumored that they never met. They never did anything.
But they also were pretty famous in my mind for being incompetent. I mean,
well, yes.
Look at Homeland Security, Mayorkas. My God, we've had 4 years of an open border, and that's going to be one of the things we're going to see. I'd say before we get to the end of January, and Trump will be sworn in on January 20th, he is going to do everything he can before the end of January to seal that border. I even kind of question, not that it's been talked about, whether he would temporarily move any of our military troops along the border just to back up the Border Patrol. Tom Homan, who has spent something like 30 years in law enforcement and was head of the Border Patrol before, I believe that was his actual title, but I may be wrong on that. But Homan is going to be the border czar. He is very tough. He's a good appointment because the man has a wealth of experience on the border. He knows exactly what needs to be done, and he is on board with Trump in making him. That's good. So that's going to be an early on policy goal, and that was like the second highest issue that the election spun on. We know that from polling, as well as the inflation and the economy.
The population of this country has said, in so many words, with their vote, that look, we're fed up. We don't want this anymore. We're fed up with the illegal immigration. We're fed up with the high inflation. We're fed up with a foreign policy, starting with Afghanistan and 13 people needlessly killed and slaughtered. We're fed up with the Israeli slaughter and Biden doing virtually nothing, saying we support them. We support Israel wholeheartedly, and then cutting back every opportunity he had to make sure they couldn't do anything, but he really couldn't hold them back. And Israel has done a great deal to remove Hamas as the major obstacle to peace in the Middle East. And so those three issues, foreign policy, inflation, illegal immigration, he's Trump. Now the question is, Terry, the real question is looking forward, how does he deal with the two wars that are going on? Can he close the war in the Middle East? Can he deal with Ukraine?
Well, what's going to happen,
he,
and I wanted to bring that up since you brought up Ukraine. Here's the thing. Let's remember, Trump said, I'll end the Ukraine war before I even am sworn in. I'll do it as president-elect. So let's keep an eye on that. He's already had phone calls with both Zelensky and Putin. The United States has enormous pressure that we can put on other countries if we want to. Trump, unlike Biden, is willing to use the levers, the economic levers, the military levers, the political levers to squeeze other people. He did it with Iran in his first term. And with sanctions on Russia, with talking to Zelensky and say, we're not going to be sending you any more aid. That pipeline is going to dry. All of a sudden, those people are going to be forced into coming together and making a deal. Or they're going to face the consequences. And that's an approach that Trump is going to be bringing up. I think another major issue that people haven't focused on as much, but I have to look, when Trump came in 2017, the national debt was $19 trillion. Today, the national debt is at $37 trillion. In just 8 years, I should say, it has virtually doubled. And Jeff, one of the things that Trump has already announced he's going to have is a Department of Government Efficiency, and who's going to be co-chairs on that? Elon Musk, which by itself is amazing. I said to someone the other day, he's like the Albert Einstein of our generation. Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who is speaking of being articulate and smart. Vivek is extremely articulate, also very smart. And we have to look at right now, because we have run up debt so high, right now we are in the budget paying $1.13 trillion just in interest payment. That is not paying down the debt, which continues to grow, but interest payments, like running up on your credit card, is consuming more and more of the budget, and that is more spending, $1.13 trillion, than what we now spend on defense. Throughout the government, there is massive waste. Here we have $7 billion that we're paying leasing empty office spaces because still so many of the federal bureaucrats are working from home. We have $1.3 billion, which has been sent to people who are dead via the IRS payments, Medicaid payments, veteran groups, and Social Security payments going to people who are no longer alive. And there was a hearing with the Auditor General of the United States earlier this year, where they were hearing on what had happened and gone wrong with some of these COVID payments, the unemployment payments during the Biden administration, and the massive amount of debt. And Jeff, just take a look at this graphic. So $560 billion lost. That's Scott Perry, who was on the committee and hearing the testimony. Let's listen briefly to a bit of that testimony that we heard.
According to a combination of estimates, $560 billion, the federal COVID relief funding, may have either been lost to fraud or paid improperly. And while some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle condense that to a percentage of the overall and would kind of have us believe that it's acceptable because it's a small percentage of trillions of dollars, I don't know, $560 billion. I'm from a little town in Pennsylvania. That seems like a lot of money to folks like me. I imagine you feel the same way. An estimated, this is per ID.me, an estimated 40%, that's nearly half of pandemic unemployment assistance funds, that's $400 billion, did not go to Americans and instead went to criminal gangs in Russia, China, and Nigeria. A Nigerian crime ring named Scattered Canary was involved in submitting more than 2 million.
So Jeff, that's a portion of the hearing, and the point is that finally, after years of ignoring the growth in the national debt, we have a government effort to stymie some of this waste, fraud, and abuse and the growth of spending. I would say for the first time, until you went back to the Reagan administration, we had the what was the name of the commission? Now I'm dropping the name of it, but it was a businessman that President Reagan had brought in, the Grace Commission, William Grace, the Grace Commission, and they put together quite a list of cuts. That Reagan did get some of that. So this is going to be big, and I think on one hand, this is also going to be popular, politically popular, because we got to get a handle on some of the spending.
Well, look, Trump has basically 2 years to do a lot. He doesn't know if he'll still have the majority after 2 years that he has with the House and the Senate. And so we've mentioned a number of things he has to deal with that he's got to get. For starters, he's got to get his cabinet, at least most of the cabinet, approved. And then we've mentioned the wars that are going on, the Hamas war and the Ukraine war. And he wants to resolve those if he can, but he doesn't want to split the baby. He doesn't want to say to Ukraine, well, you've lost a lot of territory, but tough, why don't you settle? So he's going to
I'm not so sure that he wouldn't say that.
Well, he might, but I don't think that's going to make him a good president at the end of the day.
Well, that's a subjective judgment. I think what Trump wants to do is say we're not going to be spending. Look, right now we have a bucket with a hole in the bottom, and it's called Ukraine aid, and Trump wants to cut that aid off and cut it off because the war is over. We might spend some money to help them rebuild some, but
as you know, he has talked about other allies who have strong interest in that area who perhaps ought to be contributing more. So you don't have to cut the feet off of Ukraine in order to refigure this.
Well, you end the war, and that way you don't have to be sending them arms anymore. And let's not forget, the U.S. military also, we're sending them our stuff. We need to rebuild the U.S. military. We should also mention, Jeff, this is key before we close out, we have new leadership in the Senate. Senator John Thune of South Dakota is going to be the new majority leader. And so he is going to be replacing Mitch McConnell. McConnell was never a real big fan of Donald Trump, and they butted heads all the time. So again, when we go back to the first Trump administration, when he had any number of opponents, not just on the Democratic side, but within the Republican Party, who never really at first accepted him. Now he has been the Republican nominee for president 3 times in a row. Now he, for the second time, is the president of the United States. I think the landscape is entirely different, and that's a big takeaway from our discussion today and for looking at this new Trump administration, entirely different landscape than when he came in 2017.
The important thing for Donald Trump is to keep his eye on the ball. The strategic issue is China. China militarily, China economically. China is a major, major opponent of the United States. They're talking, people are talking, they may be getting ready for war in 2027. So that's coming up. And there's a lot of doubt whether the U.S. is ready to participate in anything in any kind of holding back of China. So that ought to be a strategic focus day one. He needs people who can deal with
on that
right now.
Who did he appoint as Secretary of State? Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio is a China hawk. Marco Rubio backs tariffs on China, backs punitive actions against them if they are warlike. And yes, we do have to address it because Xi in China says to prepare for war by 2027. So Trump is going to have to face that.
The other thing quickly is to keep in mind the economy. He won on the economy. They liked his economy 4 years ago. They liked what he was saying. He better keep a strong eye on real economic growth. That's the key to a strong
right.
economy.
That's right, Bob. Folks, Jeff and I, as we said in the beginning, we're not able to follow up, but now we're going to be following the Trump administration, all the changes. Stay with us. Give us your thought and comments on what you think. And Jeff, until next time, we will say goodbye.
Goodbye.